Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I've been so excited for this next session, and Michael is here to introduce you to the power of narrative thinking with PM storytelling techniques for how to structure your thinking, get buy-in for your ideas, turn data into a story, and manage up, down, and across. So I want to introduce you all to Michael Margolis, CEO of Story, to hear a little bit more about him. So for 20 years, Michael has helped top executives and product teams get their story straight. He is the go-to narrative advisor for many of the most iconic tech companies on the planet, solving complex problems around tech disruption, speculative big bets, and change at scale. His narratives have influenced over $10 billion of investment inside Google, Meta, Shopify, Dolby, and NASA. Trained as a cultural anthropologist, he is a student of language systems and wisdom traditions. Michael began his career as a social entrepreneur working on poverty, race, and the digital divide. He is an original thinker, philosopher, and an evangelist for the global storytelling movement. He's also the author of 2 best-selling books, including Story 10X, Turn the Impossible into Inevitable. He believes the narrative is upstream of every other problem that we currently face, and that words are the new code, the number one most important skill for your career's acceleration. Michael is colorblind, left-handed, and eats more chocolate than the average human. Please join me in welcoming Michael Margolis, and please feel free to drop questions in Yammer. We will be weaving those in. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Serena. And thank you all for tuning in and joining us for this session. So I want to spend the next 45 minutes talking about this evolutionary moment that we all feel that we're in. Let's be honest. These are some pretty strange freaking times. Right? Now, I don't know about you all, but since November 30th, in the release of ChatGPT, I can't sleep at night. I'm geeking out down the rabbit hole of what are the implications of generative AI on our world, on our future, the way that we work, and what it means to the future of our entire industry. What I want to do over the next 45 minutes is really 3 things. I want to talk to you about, number 1, why great PMs are great storytellers, the importance of narrative, what that will do for your career acceleration, especially with executive presentations, cross-functional collaboration, and so on, right? And then number 2, I want to talk about change, right? This exponential rate of change that we're now going through. What does that mean for how we need to reframe our narratives? And then lastly, I want to talk about how words are the new code, the importance of semantics or language, especially in this new AI disrupted future. So we got a lot to cover. I'm going to jump in. Zarina, I'm looking forward to our back and forth as we go as well.
Me too.
So let's talk about change. I think it was 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, if I'm getting it right, coined the idea that change is the only constant. He went on to influence Aristotle and Plato in their own thinking as well. So change is the only constant. But what happens then when change, the rate of change goes exponential? Because this kind of feels like what we're going through, doesn't it? So as someone who is a story philosopher, the good news I'm here to tell you is that change is the forcing function of a story. Literally, a story is the description of change over time. So when the world changes, we just have to change our story to reflect that new world, right? We have an opportunity here to take all the change that's happening right now and to start telling more and better stories. Now, we have to keep in mind, with disruption, the story is up for grabs. And if you're not telling the story, someone else is going to tell it for you. So this is why becoming more aware and conscious of what story are we telling? Where's that story taking us? Do people want to go there? Why is that so important to the role and the job that you play as a PM at Microsoft? So a quick existential poll here. Who likes change? I can't see the Yammer right now, but I'm curious, how many of you like change? And some of you might be raising your hand. The fact that you're a PM, I hope you like change. The fact that we're living in this time right now of generative AI, again, I hope you like change because these are the times that we're in, right? If you are an innovator, a change maker, a disruptor, you might be built for change. I certainly am. Let me ask you a second question, though. How many of us like change we're not in control of? Now, when I'm in front of audiences and I ask the second question, most of the hands in the room all immediately drop. There's usually one or two snarky, brave souls that keep their hand up. But the reality is most of us do not like change we're not in control of. And yet, that's the reality that we often face. So one of the things that's fascinating about storytelling and narrative, there is an established field of practice called narrative therapy that basically looks at the stories we experience in our lives. We can't change the past. We can't change what has happened. But what we can change is the story that we tell about it. That is narrative agency. That is the most powerful force in our lives and on the planet. And so as a PM, again, there are circumstances and forcing functions of constraints that are being put upon you, what you're being asked to do, as everybody has to have a chat GPT AI enhanced feature to your product and all the implications that come with that. Amidst those constraints, you have the opportunity to take control of the narrative. Okay. This is a fateful choice. Storytelling is like fortune telling. It literally is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the question is, are you telling a story where you're a victim of those circumstances? Are you telling a story about all the things that are wrong, broken, not working? Or are you telling a story that inspires and motivates and gets people excited about the future and the possibilities that come with that? This is what we're going to unpack together today. I'm going to be sharing with you some narrative methods and techniques that work at the highest levels and stakes across the world of tech that you can use to influence even when you don't have authority. So let's talk about your job as a PM. I think about it through three lenses. The first job of a PM is to create clarity, right? What are we working on? What are we prioritizing? Most importantly, where are we going? Right? You have to communicate a North Star that has to translate onto a roadmap. You need a mission and a vision and ways of motivating and inspiring your people, especially when you are building things that often lack precedent. Number two is you have to strengthen alignment, especially when it comes to XFN collaboration. Right? How are you getting eng and design and data science and all of your cross-functional stakeholders on the same page, especially when things are moving so fast, everybody's in a different version of the story. Not to mention, you have to create alignment around empathy. What are we solving for and why? Who does it benefit? The customer, the user. And you as a PM, as the orchestrator and the driver of how all these people come together, you need to be showing your compassion and understanding of all these different stakeholders, from the customer and user to all the other functional disciplines. And then lastly, you have to increase velocity of not only execution, but decision making. So what are the three jobs, right? The three jobs of a PM: creating clarity, strengthening alignment, increasing velocity. Well, what is that really about? Narrative, empathy, and decision making. My guess is you have a lot of frameworks and tools for empathy and for decision making. The question I have for all of you is, what narrative frameworks and tools do you have for creating clarity?
Michael, I wanted to ask you, though, isn't it enough to just have a ton of great data? I kind of feel like, why do we need to really care about crafting a story out of the data? Like, numbers are great. Can't we just use the data?
You absolutely need data. And in a little bit, I'm going to share one of our signature frameworks for narrative thinking that's a 3-step framework where data is step number 3. What often happens, though, is if you lead with the data, the story is dead on arrival. Well, how'd you come up with that data? Or I don't know if I agree with that conclusion, right? We often make the mistake that we do not have shared context, right? People don't see the big picture. And then also people often aren't self-identifying. They don't emotionally relate to what is at stake and why it matters. So data is king. But if data is king, context and emotion are the queen. And the queen should always go first. All right, last point that I want to mention, and we're going to come back to this. Data is a story of the past, whereas disruption is a story about the future. Okay? This is where things get tricky, and it's really relevant when it comes to ChatGPT and generative AI. The language model is a reflection of the past, our past knowledge and past understanding. This is super valuable. We can change the world. We can build things that have never been built before, but understand that you are going to need to be doing an interpretive layer because what you're building is often something without precedent. You're asking people to think and look at things in a fresh way. So this tension between past performance versus doing something that's new and different is one of the core cruxes I think that PMs struggle with. We all struggle with this. So let's put a bookmark on that and we'll come back to it. Reed, who I've got the honor and privilege of serving as his warm-up act today, reminds us that as a leader, you have to be an expert storyteller, right? It's how we galvanize our teams. It's how we persuade investors. It's how you excite your customers. There's a lot of buzz and lip service from many of our leading tech icons who talk about the power of storytelling and its importance. Yet again, there are very few frameworks and tools that we are given for how to do this. You cannot take the hero's journey and plug and play that into a business storytelling context. It just doesn't work. So instead, I'm going to share with you some other things that I think might make more of a difference. Okay, so confession time. I used to suck at storytelling. Seriously, as you might already tell, I'm a little long-winded, I'm nonlinear, I'm a little messy, I'm a mad professor, I can ramble on, I get distracted by things, right? But I have an ability to look at really complex, difficult riddles to solve and crack that riddle, solve that Rubik's Cube. Okay? What it's meant for me is I've always worked with disruptive technologies. I've always been good with words and ideas, but early on, I found that skepticism and cynicism was my kryptonite. If I was in front of a less than friendly audience, my mojo would go out the window. I'd find myself tongue-tied and twisted. My ability to take people to the mountaintop would get mowed down, right? It would get destroyed by a buzzsaw. And we've all been in that situation or meeting. No matter how well prepared you think you are, you walk into a meeting with an executive or with a counterpart, and they start just railing into you. And this happened to me 20 years ago. I'd spent weeks preparing for one of the most important presentations of my life. And I had my bullet points, and I had to go in and meet with my board chairman and talk to them why we weren't going to hit our milestones on the roadmap. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And I mustered all the courage that I had for this meeting. And the moment we started this meeting, I could tell it immediately went from bad to worse. My board chairman didn't want to be in this meeting. He started barking at me, and I froze. And as I started to try to find the words, I was literally choking on my own tongue. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor thinking I was having a heart attack. when in fact, I just had a panic attack. Well, needless to say, that meeting didn't go well. And within months, that startup was an epic crash and burn. But I remember picking up the pieces both that day and in the months to follow. And it was that moment that served as my inciting incident, because I didn't want to experience that feeling again. And I also realized that telling the story of innovation and disruption is one of the hardest stories to tell, because you're doing something that's never been done before. It's really hard to get others to see and feel and believe in the same things that you do, especially when you're challenging the status quo. Okay? Now, let's be honest, what you all are all tasked with ChatGPT and this next wave of generative AI, you're going to face a lot of disruption and a lot of defensiveness, a lot of pushback to the things you're trying to advance. And so that takes a very unique and special kind of storytelling. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way. Since 2015, we've worked inside 15 leading product and organizational divisions of Meta, building the narratives that have influenced billions and billions of dollars of investments on their most strategic products and initiatives, from groups to newsfeed to monetization. Or working with NASA to save and preserve a science and education program that was on the congressional chopping block. Or helping the largest platform for social change evolve from going from product to platform. They already had 100 million monthly active users, but their evolution into a platform meant they needed a new vision narrative that would completely redefine how they think about themselves, how they think about their market, how they think about their users, and communicate that inside the company, much less out in the world. So this is what we're going to explore: narrative, how you use this at the most strategic level for being able to sell what is often a speculative future. So let me philosophize for a moment, and I want to share with you one of the thesis or ideas that I realized when ChatGPT was unleashed on November 30th. Okay, there are three of the most significant scientific revolutions, right, that have occurred in the last 100 years. The first was our understanding of genetic DNA code, and it forever transformed how we understand biology and the human experience. That was then followed by the breakthroughs in our understanding of binary computer programming code, how zeros and ones software is the ultimate leverage. It can build, it can create, it can operate in our sleep. Great. So these two revolutions defined the 20th century. I'm going to go so far to say that there is a new scientific revolution that we are just at the beginning of, that you are helping to lead and advance, which is the semantic code. Language is the new zeros and ones. And the fact that words are now the new code means we have to think and operate differently. So just as Naval likes to say that software, there's two kinds of leverage. Software is leverage, media is leverage. Well, media is simply words, right? It's content. And the more we become fluent with how to work with words, the more powerful you can effectively co-pilot and drive and create and build in this new era of ChatGPT.
Michael, I wanted to ask you a question actually that came in through Yammer, because a lot of what you're talking about is tied to this theme of change, right?
Yes.
And just ongoing continuous change and the upward spiral of that. We got a great question from Daniel. He asked, how do we see change when starting a product from scratch versus a product that maybe has been around for 20 years or even longer than that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question. So I try to think about it through a few different lenses. The first, actually, that's most important is to externalize the change. Because remember, people tend to take change personally, like it's somehow an affront. I'll put it to you this way. The moment you present a new story, people who live in the old story are likely to feel wrong, bad, judged, stupid, or defensive. Okay? Somehow it's a failure on their own part. So the most important thing with change is you want to externalize the change. The question becomes, how is the world changing? And what is it about how the world is changing that then means we need to change our story, our product, our features, our strategy to reflect these new needs or this new context, right? The way that COVID changed the ways that we work, right? The way that ChatGPT is going to change the way we do customer service or change the way that we, manage our code bases, so on and so on. So the key is make the change external. It's a way to soften the defensiveness that's the natural human reaction that people have with change. Okay, so amidst all of this change, one of the things that I see everyone struggling with right now, right, is this distinction of signal versus noise. Right? There is so much we're dealing with right now. The democratization, not only of information and of storytelling and of knowledge, we don't know who to trust and what to believe. It's an overwhelming time that we're in. So in that environment, understand that narrative is like a data compression device. It literally becomes a way to give people signal amidst the infinite stories or the infinite data that we're drowning in. And Satya has a really great way to think and talk about this, right? You're trying to take something that can be described in many sentences and pages of prose, you can convert it into a couple lines of poetry, and it still gets to the essence. So that's compression. The best code is poetry. And that is true not only of zeros and ones, but it also is of words. Okay? This is what we need to get better at. And with that, right, we're challenged with this idea of a single source of truth, right? And the version control, things are moving so fast, people do not know what story they're in anymore. So how do you get everybody on the same page, in the same story, right, across eng, design, marketing, data science, and so on, especially when we think of a single source of truth being reliable and consistent, updated in a timely manner, accessible to all who need it, right? People are experiencing that thrash. We don't know which way's up, down, left, or right. And who else but product, right? And you as a product manager, who else is best positioned to help create coherence of getting everyone on the same page?
Michael, one thing I wanted to ask you about is a key challenge that a lot of product managers face is the fact that we have to influence and persuade while having very little positional power, right? So how can we leverage narrative thinking to more effectively persuade key stakeholders up, down, and across?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we often deal with lots of people who are struggling with how to influence without authority. And the funny thing is, I hear this complaint across all the functional disciplines. We talk to UX leaders and they need to influence without authority. We talk to eng managers, they need to influence without authority. So the irony is everybody thinks that they don't have enough authority to influence, and that may be true from a positional perspective. The key to it is to be able to tell a love story about the future. It's to capture people's imagination and make them curious and passionate, right? Or rather channel your own passion in a way that's contagious. Right, I'm gonna unpack this with some examples in just a moment. So do you have a follow-up on that, Serena?
Sorry, Michael, I said one more question.
Please.
Which of these, sorry about that. Which of these four skills have you found PMs have had to really work the hardest to cultivate? I think you're actually going to touch on this. I think I might be kind of skipping ahead, but if you could touch on that, I think that would help a lot of people too. So
yeah. So let me show these. These are what we have found again and again when it comes to influencing. In the influence stack, there are 4 power skills that are critical to your career acceleration and impact. Being able to structure your thinking, getting buy-in for your ideas, turning data into a story, and then managing up, down, and across. The number one, most important one, the one I get the most complaints from top executives across the world of tech. I talk to CXOs and VPs who are, I wish my directors and my direct reports knew how to structure their thinking. Structuring your thinking is the most important thing. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about how often you need to communicate your ideas and influence through async communications. This is why writing is the #1 most important skill that we need to be developing. And that's the value of ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a structured thinking platform and tool, but you got to be an effective co-pilot. The more you understand storytelling principles and practices, the more you can use it to scaffold your thinking and then color it with the context and the nuances that you need to be able to persuade and motivate. So #1, structure your thinking above everything else. Okay, I'm going to move through a few of these real quick here. Facts versus fiction. The reality is that we think most things are a fact when in fact they're usually just a frame, right? The challenge that people have with ChatGPT and the factual errors that it makes is it's just a mirror and a reflection that human existence has always been an experience of bullshit. Literally, we tell ourselves stories all day long. And trust me, all you got to do is sit down with your wife or your husband and your kids or your friends and debrief the same experience, or the same event you all experience. You're all going to have different versions of that story, right? We're constantly telling stories that have bias and filters. What these tools are doing is bringing to the surface those mechanisms, which means we need to become better storytellers, better philosophers, better ethicists. And this is what ChatGPT is going to demand all of us to do a better job of. And with that, we need to pay attention to not just what we say or what we do, but how we make people feel. So, real crash course. The neurobiology of storytelling, and in turn, the neurobiology of change. There are 3 biochemical hormones that are activated anytime you're taking in a story. #1 is cortisol, fight, flight, freeze. #2 is dopamine. This is the reward center, instant gratification. And #3 is oxytocin, the belonging molecule. The reality is most of us are in cortisol overload, right? Our email inbox, our social media feeds, information overload, attention deficit, cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. That is not a receptive state. And what are we doing? We're desperately seeking and searching for dopamine, the hit, the payoff. But underneath all of that, what we really all want and need is oxytocin, the invisible lines of connection, that which reminds us we are more similar than different. So as you work these 3 different levers, what often happens when we're building a narrative is we have to decrease cortisol and increase dopamine and oxytocin as the emotional responses that people will feel as they take in a narrative. It means, one of the examples to this is we typically, most of us have been taught to build problem statements. Start with what's wrong, what's broken, what needs to be fixed. That usually puts your audience on the defensive. Now, problem statements are great when you're solving for, a pebble in the shoe or a basic engineering logic model. Don't get me wrong, problems are great. We're all here to solve problems. But what happens when you don't have shared problem definition with your audience? Or what happens if your audience is complicit, if not responsible for that problem? We then have defensiveness, overreaction, so on and so on. So instead of problem solution, one of the techniques that we teach in our trainings is to tell the possibility obstacle story. Start with what's possible, the opportunities, the thing that captures the imagination first, and then talk about what stands in the way, the obstacles or the so-called problems. That little shift of polarity, try this in one of your next meetings and you will be blown away in how it can reframe a conversation or shift a dynamic that might be where you're experiencing conflict amongst XFN collaborators or within a key executive. Okay, so I want to share another really important distinction here. This one distinction, I would go so far to say that 98% of most storytelling trainings ignore this one distinction, and this one distinction is the most important distinction for you being able as a PM to build a narrative, for you being able to influence and translate the power of storytelling at the most important business level. So a story is a specific event. It has a beginning, middle, and an end, right? We live in a world of infinite sea of stories, and things like Facebook and social media democratized storytelling, right? Everybody has a story about everything, okay? But each story is a closed loop. It's a pearl, right? And we tend to cling to our stories like a life raft. In contrast, narrative is a larger abstract concept. It does not have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Instead of circumstance, choice, and consequence, it's context, emotion, and evidence. What you need to be building as a PM is a single shared narrative. If stories are pearls, the narrative is the string of pearls. If stories are a life raft, the narrative is an ocean liner. Think, for instance, of the American dream. The American dream is a narrative. Now, we all have individual stories of the American dream. My father was born in the bush of Africa, right? In a country called Rhodesia at the time, on the border with Mozambique, came to the States on a Fulbright scholarship, first generation immigrant. That's part of my American dream story. Zarina, I bet you have many, right, stories of your own family and life, right?
Yeah,
and
I
then,
do.
right? And so we have these individual stories, but then the American dream is the overarching narrative. And we're in a debate right now about, well, is the American dream still alive? What does it mean in this new time? How do we help more people access and unlock their share of the American dream? So on and so on. So stories are great. 98% of everything that you are taught, including, by the way, a user story, an individual story about, social media stories, all of it, those are great. Think of those as ornaments. The Christmas tree, though, is the narrative.
Love that.
All right, so I'm going to move through these things a little bit faster here. So storytelling 101, circumstance, choice, consequence. Right? Those are the individual stories. At the center is choice, right? What choices do we make? Think of this as like video game mechanics, okay? And we then build on that, though, and we go to Aristotle's 3 proofs of rhetoric. This is now when we start building narratives. Ethos, pathos, and logos, right? Ethos is being able to zoom out and help people see the bigger picture. How is the world changing, right? And with that, what is the larger motivations of what is it that people want or need more of? What is seeking expression? We then need to zoom in to pathos or empathy, getting people to self-identify or connect. And then lastly, we present logos, which is reason, the data, the evidence. What people don't understand about Aristotle's 3 proofs of rhetoric or often overlook, these are decision gates, and one has to follow the next.
So Michael, just to be sure, you can't just have you can't just have one, right? Like you can't just have logos. You have to have them all together.
Absolutely. So the way we talk about this, and I'm getting ahead of a couple slides here, which is fine, but people have to see it and they have to feel it in order to believe it. Mm-hmm. You see, logos is the believe it part. That's the data and the conclusions. But unless it's a self-evident truth where you already have consensus reality, right, you're going to need to persuade and motivate people, and that requires a different kind of narrative construction. So let me blast through these, and I'm going to show some examples of this. So let's talk about some narratives in action. All right, so here's 3 examples that I'm going to pull from some of our work. The first one here is for a developer ops company. Their Series D, they built a code navigation tool. And they were struggling, though, to communicate the bigger narrative of what they do and why it matters. They have a lot of developer first street cred, but they wanted to move upstream and be able to sell to the CTO and the CIO, right? And at that level, what they realized through this work was we need to talk about developer velocity, right? The ability to basically increase your ability to ship faster. We also identified developer happiness, right? The ability to empower your devs, because devs tend to spend twice as much time trying to read the code than writing the code. And then lastly, it was about developer success, about how do you manage a code base or searching the code at scale. Okay, these were parts of the narrative that completely changed and transformed and repositioned this company of moving upstream, of making the business case and the value props for an enterprise B2B buyer. Similarly, when Facebook needed to introduce stories as a social media format, we had to build a narrative to explain that value proposition inside Facebook, because many people at Facebook did not understand what had happened with Snapchat and what Instagram started to do, what implications that would have for Facebook core app or Facebook Blue. And so we identified and started building a narrative about how stories as a format have a much greater level of frequency, intimacy, and ephemerality. So people use stories as a format for sharing with close friends, right? You think twice before posting to your newsfeed more than once a day, but stories you can post 3, 5, 10 times, and it's sharing more of the everyday moments instead of the milestone moments, right? And the ephemerality comes from impermanence. The fact that you see it and it's gone creates increased level of safety or trust, and it sort of reduces the performative aspects and the pressures that many of us feel. Last example here, this narrative actually has transformed how $50 billion of new medical breakthroughs are now going through the regulatory process. And there was a real challenge to how quality evidence was being done by leading biopharma companies, and they needed to communicate this quality transformation. And it became a narrative where we talked about changing the way people think about quality. Instead of being a cop on the beat, that quality actually was unlocking value from an end-to-end perspective, being much earlier in the product development lifecycle, and that they could de-risk the process through greater transparency, not only with regulatory authorities, but with the public, as well as with all of their internal XFN collaborators. So these are a few quick examples. This is, by the way, all described in our latest book, Narrative Thinking. You guys will all actually get a link, an opportunity to get a free copy of the book in just a moment. But you can also find it on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and so on. Okay, so this is the thing I want to sort of zero in on here on the back end. This is what is described in great detail in my latest book, Story 10X, which is people have to see it, and they have to feel it in order to believe it. These are the decision gates for how you build a narrative that creates clarity, that strengthens alignment, and increases velocity, as well as confidence in the future that you're trying to create. Too often, we lose the forest for the trees, or rather lose the trees for the forest. We are too close. We're drowning in an infinite sea of stories instead of being able to zoom out and see the big picture, and helping people to see the opportunities and the possibilities that come with change. That's the zoom out, then zooming in and getting people to emotionally self-identify and connect to why this matters. And then lastly, presenting the data, the evidence, the things that validate the promise, the potential that you're selling. We too often are leading with the data, and our story is dead on arrival. Yes, Rena.
Oh, no, Michael, I was just going to say, at the very end, we were hoping to take some questions, but we
great.
might actually run out of time. So please continue on. And if anyone has questions,
I think we've got
there's so much to talk about. Yeah.
There's just a couple slides. I think I've got 2 or 3 slides left here. So,
of course, yeah.
So let me come to this. right? This is a reminder from Patrick Winston, who's considered one of the preeminent godfathers of the artificial intelligence movement, who reminds us your success in life is going to be determined largely by your ability to speak, your ability to write, and the quality of your ideas in that order. This is why structured thinking is so important. And the way that you can structure your thinking is by learning how to think in narrative. Narrative is the fundamental, universal language of humanity. It's literally how we construct, make sense, and meaning of everything. And many of the forefathers of the AI movement actually understood that computational linguistics is built on narrative intelligence. These language models are story-making machines. In fact, I want to show with you just a couple quick things here. ChatGPT is a story-making machine. Prompt engineering, right, which is one of the hottest new jobs out there, $200,000 to $300,000 a year. The more you can think like a storyteller, ask it to, you go ahead and define a role, tell it to act like a copywriter or act like a CEO executive and so on. Your ability to set the context, give it a pattern or a framework to emulate, give it boundaries. The more you can set the scene, right, as a reality simulator, the better the results and the output that you're going to get. Okay, so the thing I want to actually quickly do here is offer the following to all of you. So we covered a lot today. If you got something out of today's session, there's no greater compliment than just giving me 2 minutes of feedback. I want to give you all a gift, which is a free digital copy of our latest book, Story 10X. So the audio book is going to be yours as a gift. If you can just grab your phone, open up your camera app, scan this QR code, and it's going to ask you to type in the code audiobook. So when prompted, just type in audiobook. It's going to ask you just a couple quick questions, and you will immediately get the audiobook version of Story 10X. And also share some feedback. What did you like and want more of? And so on. So I'm going to give everybody just a moment on this. And then while people are doing that, Zarina, I'm happy to just take any last questions we might have.
Michael, we got a ton of amazing questions in Yammer. I think I guess what I would ask you as a final thing is any closing thoughts, anything, any like key tagline you want to kind of leave the audience with? It's been awesome hearing all of this.
Yeah.
Anything you want to wrap up with? The questions in Yammer, there's so many of them. So yeah.
Yeah, it's look, my hope for you all is the following, right? That in this evolutionary moment that we're in, right? If you believe that ChatGPT and generative AI is as significant, if not more than the popularization of the internet, and that it's going to forever change the way that we work, the way that we live, the way that we think. If you believe in that thesis, which is part of the thesis you're all being asked to lead and build as PMs at Microsoft, then what I want to remind you of is that narrative is the #1 most important yet underdeveloped skill that will accelerate your career and impact. It will also help you to create more empathic and impactful products. How we translate the power and the gifts of these tools into our culture, right? This is the opportunity. And as a PM, you are an orchestrator and a driver of change. So this is an opportunity for you to get your story straight. The reverbs of this will not only impact the next semester of planning, your next roadmap review, or your next career conversation, but it will impact the next 3 to 5 years, the next decades, if not the next generations of life on this planet. The more you can learn to get your story straight and understand that words are the new code, the more you'll be able to contribute and make that impact. So with that, thank you all. Rock on. Happy storytelling. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I know this is just scratching the tip of the surface. This was a 45-minute fire hose of, just imagine if you had 45 minutes to teach or to introduce everyone to the power of computer programming code, right? This is what we just did, except thinking and understanding language and semantics as code. So I hope you guys got something from today, and so admire and appreciate everything that you guys are up to, and look forward to continuing the conversation. I want to give one last huge shout out to Amit Foulé, who's putting together this conference. Thank you for your vision. I'm honored for the privilege to be here, and your recognition of the importance that narrative and storytelling plays for PMs at Microsoft. Thanks, everyone.
Michael, thank you so much. It was incredible.